Earth was not supposed to matter yet. That was the opinion whispered in the high chambers of Nemea Station, where the Solar Compact weighed the worth of new worlds the way a merchant weighed grain. Earth had ships, yes, and stubborn little embassies, and a talent for arriving at meetings with too many questions. But it did not have old fleets, old treaties, or old fear attached to its name. To the elder powers, humanity was interesting in the way a storm on the horizon was interesting. Not dangerous if watched carefully, not welcome if ignored. Envoy Inara Solak knew this the moment she stepped into the Compact's hearing hall. The chamber was built for species who trusted distance more than warmth. Delegations stood on separate platforms, each surrounded by soft barriers of light, air, and custom. The Noral Trade Minister Pelhesh watched from a polished crescent of black glass, his many-ringed hands folded in formal patience. Mir Othriel of the Yomari stood alone and still, recording every shift of posture, every breath of tension, every insult disguised as procedure. At the central dais waited High Warden Qel Vossaru of the Kharvethi. He was tall, armored in layered ceremonial plates, with a narrow face that seemed carved for contempt. The Kharvethi had guarded the Compact's outer borders for generations. They believed this made them realists. Others believed it made them bullies with excellent manners. Humanity requests provisional expansion rights, Inara said, voice steady. Shared navigation lanes, medical exchange access, and observer privileges in security matters affecting our region. Qel Vossaru did not immediately answer. He let silence do the first cut. Earth, he said at last, has been known to the Compact for a brief span. In that time, your species has armed merchant ships, disputed quarantine boundaries, reverse-engineered docking systems without permission, and sent civilian volunteers into a radiation spill after being ordered to withdraw. Inara remembered that incident. The radiation spill had been aboard a Noral freighter. Human volunteers had saved most of the crew. We considered survival more urgent than permission, she said. Several platforms flickered with quiet translation delays. Qel Vossaru's eyes sharpened. Exactly. Your species treats law as something to be negotiated with emotion. No, Inara replied. We treat law as something meant to protect life. It was a good answer. It was not enough. The vote was postponed. Earth would be reviewed later, when it had matured into predictable conduct. That phrase traveled faster than any official report. Across Earth's diplomatic channels, it produced anger, mockery, and more than a few jokes. On Hearthring, the great orbital network above Earth, Admiral Davor read the decision while standing beside a viewport that looked down on the blue curve of home. He did not laugh. Davor had commanded rescue missions through asteroid strikes, pirate raids, reactor failures, and one terrible winter flood that had swallowed entire coastal cities. He knew the difference between an insult and a warning. The Compact was not merely unimpressed by Earth. It was afraid of what humans became when pressed. Beside him, Nico Arendt scrolled through docking schedules, supply charts, and fuel allocations with the frown of a man who distrusted empty corridors because they could be used for storage. They think we are children, Nico said. They think we are a fire, Davor replied. Are we? Davor watched sunlight scatter across the atmosphere. That depends on who is standing too close. Far away, on Anchorhold, the Kharvethi command moon, Qel Vossaru received the same hearing summary and found no comfort in it. Delay was not victory. Humans had a gift for turning delays into preparation. That was what troubled him most. He had studied them. Not their speeches, not their flag ceremonies, not the sentimental broadcasts they sent to one another after disasters. He had studied their numbers, how fast they repaired, how fast they learned, how quickly rivals became partners when confronted with a large enough threat. Other young species fractured under pressure. Humans argued, blamed, shouted, investigated, improvised, and then somehow built working systems from the wreckage of their disagreement. Qel Vossaru believed this was not admirable. It was invasive. If Earth was allowed to grow, it would not remain a minor world at the edge of Compact politics. It would become the standard by which the Compact judged itself. That, to Qel, was intolerable. So he approved a quiet operation. No fleet, no declaration, no battle that could be answered. A mendicant probe, one of thousands used across known space for harmless sampling, was altered in a sealed Kharvethi laboratory. Its shell bore no obvious mark. Its cargo was smaller than a dust mote and more patient than hatred. It entered Earth's atmosphere above a storm and died like a speck of metal. The first patients appeared in scattered cities. A schoolteacher collapsed while writing on a board. A dock worker forgot his daughter's name, then developed a fever so fierce the hospital bed registered heat through its frame. A musician in Lagos woke unable to feel his hands. A miner in the Andes coughed black threads into a white cloth. Doctors thought of toxins, viruses, industrial leaks, food contamination. Every theory held for a few hours before the illness changed shape and made fools of them. At 3:12 a.m., Dr. Meher Nandal was called into the Emergency Pathogen Center beneath the old stone buildings of a research campus that had survived wars, floods, and budget committees. She had not slept in 2 days. She had a cold cup of tea beside her and a stack of reports that seemed to contradict one another out of malice. Then she saw the image. Under magnification, the pathogen did not look alive in the usual way. It resembled dark glass filaments braided through tissue, each thread branching into smaller threads, each smaller thread carrying structures too precise for chance. Meher felt the room narrow around her. "This was built," she whispered. The statement should have caused disbelief. It did not. Every scientist in the room had been thinking the same thing and fearing the moment someone would say it aloud. Earth named the illness Morrowglass. The name entered public speech before governments could soften it. There were official briefings, emergency instructions, school closures, travel limits, hospital expansions, and daily counts that families checked with dread. There was fear, there was anger, there were conspiracy broadcasts and opportunists and foolish people who mistook denial for courage. But there was also something Qel Vossaru had underestimated. Humanity did not wait to be saved. Khaldun Mun, head of Earth's public health coordination effort, opened every channel at once. He had spent most of his career preparing for disasters people called unlikely until they happened. Now he sat in a plain office with cracked plaster behind him and addressed every regional authority on the planet. No hoarding of data, he said. No prestige barriers. No waiting for perfect certainty. If a treatment fails, report it. If a treatment helps, report it faster. If you need supplies, ask before you run out. If you have supplies, send before you are begged. It was not graceful. Nothing about Earth was graceful in those first desperate weeks. But it moved. Factories changed purpose. Perfume plants made sterilizing fluid. Car companies made mobile clinics. Breweries produced medical-grade alcohol. Shipyards built isolation modules. Farmers coordinated food deliveries for cities under quarantine. Retired nurses returned to hospitals with old shoes and steady hands. Students delivered medicine. Pilots flew through storms because roads had failed. Religious halls, sports arenas, warehouses, and school gyms became treatment centers. On Hearthring, Nico Arendt turned chaos into roots. He did not have enough cargo drones, so he used maintenance tugs. He did not have enough refrigerated containers, so fishing fleets and restaurant suppliers were folded into medical transport. He did not have enough trained handlers, so he made short lessons that anyone with patience and gloves could follow. He spoke gently to frightened mayors and brutally to officials who tried to hide stockpiles. He had no tolerance for pride when people were dying. Admiral Davor watched it all from orbit and understood the shape of the war before anyone called it one. There was no enemy fleet to meet, no border to defend. The battlefield was blood, breath, trust, and time. He ordered Hearthring open to civilian command. Military assets would carry medical priority. Every orbital bay not essential to planetary defense became part of the relief web. Some officers objected, quietly once. Davor ended the discussion with a single sentence. Earth is the thing we defend. In the laboratories, Meher Nandal chased the disease through failure after failure. Morrowglass reacted to immune response. When attacked one way, it folded itself into another. When suppressed, it waited. When starved, it borrowed from the cells around it. It had been designed by minds that understood biology as siegecraft. Sajit Rua entered her life carrying a box of illegal adapters. He was not a doctor. He was a civilian engineer from an industrial repair consortium, a man who had spent years making incompatible machines speak politely to one another. He had been sent to help maintain diagnostic equipment. Instead, he took one look at the lab's slow testing process and asked why everyone was tolerating it. Meher stared at him with red eyes. Because physics has not yet accepted our request for mercy. Sajit nodded, as if this was a normal answer, and began dismantling a scanner worth more than a city block. By morning, he had assembled a device from medical imagers, old manufacturing sensors, and parts that still had shipping labels attached. It hummed too loudly, overheated twice, and forced the evacuation of one room when a coolant line burst. But it read, Morrowglass changes in minutes instead of hours. Meher loved it immediately and hated that she loved it. With faster readings, patterns emerged. Morrowglass did not simply evade the immune system. It learned from it. It expected direct attack. It expected panic treatments. It expected species to seal away the sick until the dead outnumbered the living. So Meher proposed something stranger. "Stop chasing it," she said. The room fell quiet. She pointed to the molecular model rotating above the table. It adapts because it recognizes pressure. But if we give it a false signal, if we convince it the body has already surrendered in a specific way, it locks into a dormant form. It thinks it has won. While it is dormant, we teach the immune system to clear it. Khaldun Mun, listening through a secure line, understood the risk. "Can you make that into treatment?" "Not one treatment," Meher said. "A platform, adjustable by strain." Sajit leaned over the model, eyes bright with exhaustion. "We can print the carrier structure. Not elegantly, not cleanly at first, but we can make it in quantity if someone gives me ugly factories and permission to offend their designers." Nico Arendt, patched into the same call, said, "Done." That was how Veilroot was born. Not in a pristine moment of genius, but in the collision of grief, stubbornness, mathematics, and machinery. It worked first on tissue samples, then on animal analogs, then on the first emergency patients who had no other chance. A little girl in Manila whose organs had begun failing opened her eyes and asked for water. An old railway mechanic in Krakow squeezed his son's hand. A surgeon who had treated patients until she collapsed sat up and demanded to know how many beds were still full. The world did not cheer all at once. Relief came unevenly, through sobs in hospital corridors and quiet messages sent at odd hours. The cure was not simple. It required careful matching, repeated doses in severe cases, and constant surveillance for new strain behavior. But humanity had found the door. Then came the second terror. Noral ships had carried Morrowglass beyond Earth before anyone understood the danger. Trade stations reported cases. A mining moon. A food processing colony. A Kharvethi border depot. The disease was loose among species whose immune systems responded in different ways, producing strains Earth had only begun to imagine. At Nemea Station, the Sular Compact panicked behind formal language. Pelhesh contacted Earth through emergency channels. The Noral minister had voted to delay Earth's privileges. He had called humans commercially promising, but socially unstable. Now his people were sick, and his voice trembled despite all his training. "Envoy Solak," he said, "we request access to your treatment." Inara did not answer immediately. She knew what some on Earth would say. Let them wait. Let them understand. Let them pay first. She also knew what Davor Ilian would say. Within the hour, the Admiral stood before a wall of fleet status lights and gave the order. Load Donrit. Medical teams. Portable Veilroot production units. Strain analyzers. Isolation shelters. Noral colony first, then every confirmed outbreak by severity. An officer asked, "And if the compact refuses entry?" Davor's expression did not change. "Then they can explain to their citizens why human medicine is waiting outside their docks." Captain Boris Ekweme commanded the Donrit, a relief ship whose hull carried the scars of meteor impacts, rescue grapples, and hurried repairs. He had the calm of a man who had already made peace with danger and found it boring compared to paperwork. When his crew learned they would be carrying Veilroot away from Earth while Earth itself was still suffering, no one celebrated the nobility of it. They checked seals, secured cargo, called families, and went to work. The dawnrit reached the Noral colony under quarantine beacon. No welcoming lights greeted them. No music. No ceremony. Only docking clampering, trembling from overuse, and a medical director whose face displayed the brittle politeness of someone expecting condemnation. Captain Ekweme stepped onto the station in a plain pressure suit. "Show us your sickest ward," he said. That was all. Human doctors moved through alien corridors with portable scanners and translated instructions. Human engineers repaired air filters because medicine was useless if ventilation failed. Human cooks converted ship stores into food the Noral could digest. Human nurses learned unfamiliar pulse rhythms and comfort gestures by watching what families did at bedsides. Mir Othrel arrived later as an official observer. The Yomari recorded human crews sleeping in shifts on floors, arguing over dosage tables, singing softly to stay awake, and treating Noral officials with the same tired impatience they used on their own commanders. No reverence, no revenge, just work. When the first Noral patients recovered, Pelhesh made the mistake of trying to thank Captain Ekweme in grand diplomatic language. The captain listened for several seconds, then interrupted. "Minister with respect, save it for the people who designed this thing. We're busy." The recording spread through compact networks. Many found it rude. Many more found it unforgettable. While Earth's relief fleet moved outward, another human weapon took shape. Osrin Thaler had never commanded a ship, never worn combat armor, never held a line against pirates or storms. He was a legal scholar with a voice like dry paper and a memory that frightened his students. He understood treaties the way engineers understood load-bearing beams. He knew where old law bent, where it cracked, and where it could bring down empires if struck correctly. The Orison Accords, ancient and often ignored, were clear about engineered disease, clear about attacks on newly contacted worlds, clear about compensation when forbidden weapons crossed borders, but law required proof. The proof came in fragments. A mendicant probe casing recovered from one of the first outbreak zones. A molecular marker in Morrowglass that matched Kharvethi defensive research patterns. Shipping anomalies near Anchorhold. Sealed commands routed through offices loyal to Qel Vossaru. Then Velk Aram broke. Velk was Kharvethi, a military officer raised on the old doctrine that order was mercy and hesitation was death. He had believed the operation against Earth would be contained, a harsh measure against a future threat. Qel Vossaru had called it prevention. Velk had accepted that word because it sounded cleaner than murder. But disease did not respect the lie. When Morrowglass reached a Kharvethi depot, Velk watched soldiers under his command sicken. He watched a young technician beg not for herself, but for her hatchling brother in another habitat ring. He watched Qel Vossaru order records sealed, casualties minimized, blame redirected. Velk understood then that his loyalty had been used as a weapon against his honor. He sent files to Inara Solak in pieces, hidden inside routine status updates. Not enough at first, then enough to ruin himself, finally enough to ruin Qel Vossaru. At Nemea Station, the emergency hearing convened under public pressure the compact could not smother. Human relief missions had made secrecy impossible. Every world with infected citizens wanted answers. Every world with human medicine in its hospitals wanted to know why the supposed primitives had arrived before the guardians of order. Qel Vossaru came armored in confidence. He expected anger. He wanted it. If humans shouted threats, if they demanded blood, if they looked as unstable as he had always claimed, he could survive the evidence. Fear would do the rest. Instead, Inara Solak spoke with a calm that enraged him. She presented the timeline. Meher Nendal explained the pathogen in terms no delegate could dismiss. Sajit Rua showed the probe fragments and the manufacturing trace. Osren Thaler recited the relevant Orison Accords with merciless patience. Then Admiral Davor Ilyan appeared by transmission from Hearthring. He looked tired. Everyone on Earth looked tired by then. Behind him, the orbital docks glowed with activity as relief ships loaded for another run. Earth has delivered Veilroot treatment to Noral, Yomari, Kharvethi, and independent settlements, he said. We will continue to do so. The disease was made as a weapon. We have made its cure available as a duty. Qel Vossaru leaned forward. Fine words from a world seeking advantage. Davor's eyes hardened. High Warden, if advantage were our only aim, we would have let your border depot burn. The chamber went still. Davor continued. We have counted our dead. We have counted the lives saved beyond Earth. We have counted the cost of ships, medicine, fuel, labor, quarantine construction, strain analysis, and the damage caused by your unauthorized attack. Osren Talar transmitted the Redress Invoice. For a moment, most delegates did not understand. Then the figures, charges, treaty citations, and demands appeared across the chamber. Repayment, full disclosure, removal of responsible officials, funding for permanent medical stations, public admission, surrender of records, reparations to every affected world. Qel Vossaru stared, then laughed. It was a cold sound, built to shame others into silence. You expect the Kharvethi to pay Earth. Davor did not raise his voice. No, I expect the guilty to pay everyone. Qel Vossaru rose. You are in no position to collect. That was when Mir Othrel released the Yomari record. It did not argue. It showed. Human medical teams carrying Noral children through failing station doors. Human engineers waist-deep in flooded cooling shafts. A Kharvethi patient gripping a human nurse's hand. Captain Ikuami asleep upright beside a ward because there were no spare beds. Earth hospitals still full, while Earth ships departed with more medicine for others. The Compact watched what humanity had done, while the old powers debated appearances. Pelhesh stood first. The Noral recognize Earth's claim, he said. We will suspend preferential trade with any authority shielding those responsible. One delegation followed. Then another. Not all. Never all. Politics did not become pure because people had suffered. But the balance shifted. Qel Vossaru felt it. The chamber was no longer his. So he reached for the oldest refuge of the cornered tyrant. He created a larger crisis. On Anchorhold, Loyalist commanders received orders to purge archives, seal medical databases, and move armed vessels toward Nemea Station. The official justification was containment of human aggression. The real purpose was hostage-taking, evidence destruction, and fear. Velk Aram refused. His refusal split Anchorhold. Some Kharvethi followed him because they had seen the sick. Others followed because Qel Vossaru's order was dishonorable. Others hesitated until Loyalists began destroying their own records, and then hesitation ended. Anchorhold became a battlefield of locked doors, sabotaged lifts, sealed archives, and frightened civilians trapped between commands. Worse, its medical vault contained strain data from infected Kharvethi sites. If destroyed, several colonies would lose their best chance at rapid treatment. Davor Ilian sent the Dawnrit and a small task group. Not battleships, not an invasion fleet, relief vessels, escorts, rescue craft, and enough armed marines to keep murderers away from doctors. Nico Arendt had prepared for the possibility that mercy would be fired upon. Every cargo vessel carried emergency shielding. Every medical pod could become a decoy. Every rescue shuttle had repair tools, breaching seals, and independent air. When Kharvethi Loyalist guns opened fire near Anchorhold, human ships did not answer with full force. They twisted through defensive arcs, launched false cargo pods, and used their own relief containers as cover. The Dawnrit took a glancing hit that tore plating from its port side. Captain Ikuami steadied himself against the command rail and ordered docking speed increased. His pilot looked back. That is not a recommended approach. No, Bori said. It is an arrival. The Dawnrit struck Anchorhold's outer dock hard enough to deform both collars. Human engineers sealed the breach with foam, clamps, and profanity. Medical teams poured through behind Marines. Inside, Velk Aram met them in a corridor lit by emergency red. For a heartbeat, Kharvethi and humans aimed weapons at one another. Then Velk lowered his rifle. The archives are this way, he said. They moved together. Qel Vossaru, watching from a sealed command chamber, felt something close to disbelief. Humans should have hated the Kharvethi. They should have come to punish. Instead, they were risking lives to preserve Kharvethi medical records and evacuate Kharvethi civilians. It offended him more deeply than revenge would have. Revenge, he understood. Mercy made him look small, so he authorized the release of the reserve strain. Morrowglass had been altered in secret after the first deployment. This version was rougher, more aggressive, designed to erase witnesses quickly. It would spread through Anchorhold's internal air before anyone could stop it. Qel Vossaru intended to blame the humans for bringing contamination aboard. Nandal saw the first markers from orbit. She had come aboard a medical command vessel against Davor's preference and her own exhaustion. When the alert sounded, she studied the new strain's behavior and felt a terrible familiarity beneath the changes. They modified the same architecture, she said. Arrogant fools. Sajit Rua, linked from an emergency fabrication bay, understood the tone in her voice. "You can adjust, Veilroot." "I can design the adjustment," Mir said. "Can you make it?" Sajit looked around at the equipment available: damaged portable printers, alien food synthesizers, industrial misting systems, emergency sprayers meant for chemical leaks. A sensible engineer would have said no. Sajit had always considered sensible engineers useful, but limited. "Yes," he said. "Badly. Quickly. With apologies to everyone who respects machines." Inside Anchorhold, alarms screamed. Civilians crowded into sealed compartments. Human-Kharvethi teams fought loyalists near the environmental control hub. Velk took a shot across his armor and kept moving. Captain Equime carried an injured Kharvethi officer behind cover, then shoved him into the arms of a human medic. Above them all, Davor received the grim option from one of his tactical officers. A concentrated strike could destroy the infected section before the reserve strain moved through the moon. It would kill loyalists, mutineers, civilians, and human teams alike, but it might save the surrounding colonies. Davor looked at the tactical display. He knew what cold arithmetic demanded. He had ordered deaths before. Any commander who pretended otherwise was either untested or lying, but he also knew the truth Qel Vossaru had never understood. Humanity's strength was not that it could make hard choices. Every species could do that when cornered. Humanity's strength was that it kept looking for another choice, long after cynics called the search childish. "Hold fire," Davor said. The officer swallowed. "Admiral, if the strain breaches the next ring, hold fire." On Anchorhold, Qel Vossaru released the reserve strain. Invisible death entered the air. Moments later, Sajit Rua's improvised system answered. Veilroot, adjusted by Maher and manufactured through abused machines never meant for medicine, moved through emergency sprayers in a fine silver mist. It coated vents, corridors, triage tents, armor seals, skin, cloth, and polished Kharvethi walls. It entered lungs and bloodstreams. It met Morrowglass not like a sword, but like a lie told convincingly to a liar. The pathogen began to fold. Not everywhere at once. Not perfectly. There were terrifying minutes when markers rose, dipped, rose again. Maher stood over the live feed with both hands pressed flat to the table, as if she could hold the numbers down by force. Then one ward cleared, then another. Then the environmental system reported dormant conversion across the infected ring. On the Donritz bridge, Captain Equime closed his eyes for exactly one breath. "Continue evacuation," he said, "and somebody find out which machine is making that horrible grinding noise before it becomes important." Qel Vossaru tried to flee through a private lift. Velk was waiting when the doors opened. The High Warden looked at the officer who had once obeyed him, and saw not rebellion, but judgment. "You would hand your own leader to humans," Qel demanded. Velk raised his weapon. "No," he said. "I hand you to the law you taught us to claim we served." Qel Vossaru was taken alive. That mattered to Davor. It mattered to Inara. It mattered to the record. Dead enemies became symbols too easily. Living criminals had to answer questions. Anchorhold did not fall. Its archives survived. Its civilians lived. Its medical data went out across the compact before any loyalist remnant could bury it. At Nemea Station, the Sular Compact reconvened under a silence very different from the one that had greeted Inara Solak's first petition. This time, no one called Earth immature. The Redress Invoice was accepted after bitter debate. The Kharvethi state would pay reparations to Earth and every affected world. Officials involved in the attack would be removed and tried under the Orison Accords. Permanent medical stations would be funded along vulnerable routes, staffed by mixed teams, with Earth granted emergency access rights when engineered disease or mass disaster threatened civilian life. Humanity did not ask for conquered moons. It asked for hospitals. It did not ask for tribute parades. It asked for inspection authority, open medical data, and transport corridors for relief ships. The Argosy Doctrine entered compact law in plain language. Aid first, judgment second, but judgment certain. On Earth, bells rang in cities where bells still existed. In hospitals, some wept, others were too tired. The dead remained dead, and no treaty repaired the empty chairs in family kitchens. But the living had been defended, and more than defended. They had been revealed. The galaxy had tried to measure humanity by its weapons and found the wrong scale. Weeks later, Hearthring dimmed its emergency lights one section at a time. Admiral Davor walked the orbital corridors while crews slept in corners and repair drones patched scarred docking bays. Below him, Earth turned blue and bright beneath the sun. Inara Solak received a final message from Mir Othral, sent through private diplomatic channels. The Yomari observer had searched the Lacuna archive after Qel Vossaru's fall. Old records hinted at other young civilizations that had risen quickly, challenged quietly, and then vanished after mysterious disasters. Morrowglass had not been the beginning of the galaxy's cruelty. It was simply the first test humanity had survived, loudly enough for everyone to see.